So I first met Tamal Krishna Goswami in 1971 in India, and the thing that stuck out in my mind, he wanted to take sannyas from Prabhupada, and he kept hassling Prabhupada and badgering Prabhupada, please give me sannyas, and every day he went in, give me sannyas, like that. So I thought this was a little bit overbearing and a little pushy towards Prabhupada. But at the same time, there had been other sannyasis in America who apparently or allegedly had locked Prabhupada in a room, and the reason Prabhupada had fled to India was he was trying to avoid these sannyasis. So I was wondering, is there a connection between Tamal wanting to take sannyas and this sannyas group that was causing all this trouble for Srila Prabhupada?
He was trying to get away from these sannyasis. So Tamal wanted to join the sannyas clique, and I was kind of suspicious of the whole sannyas clique right from the get-go, because I had heard rumors that these sannyasis were causing problems for Prabhupada, including Kirtananda. He took sannyas, and then he wanted to get a certificate of sannyas from Prabhupada, and so on. So there was a lot of kind of suspicion in my mind about the sannyas group, the clique. And also I really wondered, why was Tamal so infatuated with that group that he wanted to be, a member of that group. But anyway, Prabhupada said, well, you have a wife. Madhuri was his wife, and he said, give your wife a baby at least, so your wife will have a person to focus her affection on. She'll have a person to love, and so when you leave, she will have some person in her life. But Tamal wasn't very concerned about Madhuri, and he just kept badgering Prabhupada over and over again. Now, certain devotees would sometimes argue with Prabhupada about different things, but generally, when Prabhupada finally just said, no, it's going to be this way, then the devotees would realize, okay, that's it. Prabhupada had made a final conclusion. But in the case of Tamal, Prabhupada said, no, every day. He said, no, I'm not going to give you sannyas. But the next day, Tamal was in there, once again. So I thought this was also rather strange. This person is, he could say, harassing Prabhupada. So, in other words, he was pushy towards Prabhupada. He was pushing Prabhupada to do things that Prabhupada really didn't want to do in certain ways. So I thought this was somewhat disrespectful to Prabhupada, just for starters. But on the other hand, Tamal was a manager, and he was trying to manage different things that Prabhupada needed to have done, different legal things, and so on and so forth. So Prabhupada had a lot of devotees who just couldn't really manage, like Pradyumna, for example. He was a scholar, but could he manage a temple or a zone or anything like that? Probably not. So Prabhupada had a big dilemma that he didn't have a lot of management qualified devotees, and he didn't have devotees who were even educated very well. And the few who were educated, like Bhagavan and Tamal and Jaitirtha and so on, they kind of had a little bit of an over-aggressive nature where they were controlling somewhat. So it was a problem. You have a class of devotees that can't manage, and the few who have some management capability have a little bit of a tendency to go overboard and, be motivated and aggressive and a little pushy towards Prabhupada. There was a famous story where Harikesh was told by Prabhupada to sweep up his room, and Harikesh just said, no, you sweep it up. You made the mess. You clean it up. So there was a tendency amongst these leaders to be, disrespectful towards Prabhupada, and Tamal was among that group. But it was actually very good for me to see this, because then I realized that some of these leaders, despite claiming to be the most dedicated followers of Prabhupada, they had a tendency to be renegades, like Kirtananda was famous for being a renegade, or they had a tendency to just challenge Prabhupada's statements, or they had a tendency to badger Prabhupada and try to coerce Prabhupada into doing something which he was reluctant to do, like give sannyas to Tamal. But later on, Tamal became a very important person because he had his Radha Damodar bus program, which was the biggest book distribution part of ISKCON. And, so his buses were the number one distributors of Prabhupada's books. So Prabhupada was very anxious to get his books distributed and published while he was still here. He would say things like, after I'm gone, you won't publish my books. So it was a big problem. He was narrating these books and then, having them published. But he said, after I'm gone, even the narrations I've made will not be printed. So I want to see them printed while I'm still here. It was a big concern that he had. And he was right. After he left, the book printing went down to very low quantities, and some books are no longer in print, and so on and so forth. So he was absolutely correct on that. His books would be neglected, and not only that, his books are now being edited and changed. So it's a good thing that we have at least a quantity of original books. So he knew if we don't make these original books now, there may not be any original books later on. But Prabhupada was also having a lot of problems with Tamal Krishna's Radha Damodar bus program, because Tamal would go to a temple and visit the temple, and while he was there, he would tell the brahmacharis were the single males who were living in the temple, he would say to those people, oh, you're in Maya, you're living with women and householders, you should join our party of, celibate brahmacharis. And so he was kind of, hijacking all kinds of people out of Prabhupada's temples, and this was causing havoc, for Prabhupada's movement. So Prabhupada was having a constant strain of, trying to control Tamal's over-ambitions. And in general, Tamal had a kind of anti-householder, mentality. He didn't like the householders, and he didn't like women, and at one point he wanted to move all of the householders and all the women to some remote farm in Australia. That was his plan. And so Prabhupada had to control that and contain that and, chastise Tamal. And so it was a constant problem where Tamal was being ambitious, and Prabhupada was having to push back, against Tamal's overly ambitious program. But we have to notice certain things, that Tamal was anti-woman and anti-family. So later on, after Tamal became like the main controller of ISKCON after Prabhupada departed, we began to see anti-woman and anti-family mentality just flourish and go way overboard. And that's because Tamal had that tendency already. Of course, Srila Prabhupada himself had the same problem with his godbrothers. His godbrothers called him a rotten householder, and there was a little sannyasi clique that was managing the Gaudiya Math. And Prabhupada said they were just a motivated bunch of people who wanted to be worshipped and so on. So this problem existed even back in the 1930s. There was some sannyasis, and they were overly ambitious, and they wanted to be worshipped, and they were suppressing the householders, and Prabhupada himself was a householder. So we were kind of in good company, because these sannyasis were attacking the householder class, and that was us. But anyway, the temple presidents, most of them were householders, so they would all gather together and have a big meeting, and then they would send a representative to Prabhupada and say, Prabhupada, as representatives of the temples in North America, we would like to protest Tamal's activity. So this was an ongoing thing that was happening. But also, Tamal was ambitious amongst the sannyas group, too. He wanted to be the number one sannyas out of the group. So Vishnu Jan was very prominent at that time, and he had his own bus and his own program, and Tamal wanted to hijack Vishnu Jan's program, and he was very aggressive against Vishnu Jan, and so Tamal would keep going to Prabhupada and complain, oh, Vishnu Jan is this, Vishnu Jan is that, and so on and so forth. So I think that's one of the reasons Vishnu Jan is no longer on the planet. Tamal was the last person to talk to him, and Vishnu Jan supposedly committed suicide, but no one knows really. He's gone. So Tamal was aggressive towards other sannyasis, never mind aggressive towards the householders. He was aggressive within his own group. And that continued after Prabhupada left. Tamal was badgering Gopijana Goswami, who committed suicide, and he was, harassing another devotee named Brajendranath, and that devotee tried to kill himself by beating himself on the head with a hammer. So Tamal had a way of, discouraging and just frying out devotees in a big way, and that was going on the whole time. And so Prabhupada was always, having headaches with this Tamal. And so Prabhupada eventually said, Tamal is ruining my movement, and I can't sleep at night, and he wanted to send Tamal to China. So Prabhupada never said that about anybody else. I have to send this person to China. He's just giving me a headache constantly all the time here. And Prabhupada just summed it up by saying Tamal wants to control everything. He wants to be the supreme controller. So this is, of course, our disease. That's why we're here in the material world in the first place. We wanted to be the controller. So Tamal had a tendency he wanted to be worshipped, he wanted respect, he wanted a big position, and he wanted to control. So these were all, symptoms of false ego, I think you could say. So by 1976, I was in Los Angeles, and I was in charge of the Spanish BBT at the time. And Prabhupada's Chaitanya Charitamritas had just been printed, so I said, why don't we read these books? Like, nobody's reading these books. And so I started a little group. We were reading the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and also we were doing Harinam Sankirtan. There was hardly anybody doing Harinam Sankirtan at the time. So we went out a couple hours every day to Hollywood Boulevard. A little group of us. We had like maybe 6-7 people. And Jagjivan was part of that group, and Sulochan was part of that group. But anyway, Tamal didn't like that, because what I was really saying, in essence, was that, we're losing our good public image as the Harinam movement, and instead what's happening, we're getting a bad image, because Tamal's program was this shortchanging of people in the airport. A woman would get a $20 bill for a book, and then she would run into the bathroom and not go out. She would just keep the $20 bill. And then the man who had the book, he just had to leave because he had to catch his airplane. So they had all these different cheating techniques, and they even made a video of how to cheat people out of money. So this was causing all kinds of problems down at the airports. We were distributing a lot of books at the airports. And Tripurari was part of that program too. I think he helped make the video. But anyway, Prabhupada eventually found out about this, and he was very, very upset that they're, ruining the image of the movement. He said, this will destroy our movement. We're going to have a reputation of being crooks and thieves. So Prabhupada wrote a letter about that, protesting all these techniques. Well, that's exactly what I was doing at the time too. I said, these techniques are bad. Anyway, so the sannyasis gathered together, and they said, what are we going to do about this guy Pranjan? He's giving us a problem. He's criticizing our cheating technique process, and he's actually trying to reestablish Harinam Sankirtan. This is not good for us, because we just want to make money now, and this cheating technique was making us a lot of money, and he was one of the people who exposed that, so we got to do something. So they made up a rumor that I was smoking pot and wearing a sari, and I had wanted to become a gopi and all these kind of things, and that I had accepted a guru from another line. And they told Prabhupada that one morning. They said, Prabhupada, there's a bunch of people in Los Angeles, they're smoking pot, they're wearing saris, they're sahajas, and Prabhupada said, well, that's really bad. Who are those people? And they said, well, the guy is Pranjan, he's the leader of this group. So, Prabhupada called me into his room, and I just said, well, no, we're just reading Chaitanya Charitamrita, we're not smoking pot, and I tried to explain the situation. And Prabhupada was appeased by that. He said, okay, that's fine. And I also wrote a letter to Prabhupada right after that, explaining things. And so, a couple of days after that, Pusta Krishna came up to me and said, oh, Pranjan, did you get that nice letter from Prabhupada? What did you think about it? And I said, no, I never got the letter. So I said, wait a minute, I'm not getting a letter from Prabhupada, so they're hiding his, so they're feeding him, in other words, they're trying to control Prabhupada. They're feeding him information, wrong information, and then when Prabhupada responds and writes a letter to give information from himself, they're checking that. So they're checking information coming into Prabhupada, they're checking information coming out from Prabhupada, therefore they're trying to control Prabhupada. That's what's going on here. But there was another incident in Los Angeles around this time where I was chanting right in front of Prabhupada's murti in the temple, and I felt like someone was just staring at me or something. I just couldn't figure it out, but I felt really bad vibes from behind me. So I turned around, and it was Tamal. He was like face to face with me. He was like 6 inches behind me. And he said, I know you, Pranjan. You're waiting for Prabhupada to die so you can sit in his seat. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. which of us is thinking about sitting in Prabhupada's seat? So all this was coming together in my mind right there in 1976, that, they're lying to Prabhupada, they're hiding his letters, and they want to sit in his seat. Why are they even thinking about who's going to be sitting in his seat unless they themselves want to sit in the seat? So all this was good for me, because I needed to know all this stuff later on. Later on, it would all come together, that, they had been ambitious to control Prabhupada even while he was here. And, of course, this led later to the poison case. Poison means, they were controlling his food, controlling his medicine, and controlling what he was consuming. So it was easy for them to administer poison to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada eventually said, "I am being poisoned." So, this was just the ultimate control over Prabhupada, giving him poison. But this was their tendency all along. They wanted to control Prabhupada. Now later on, another devotee named Indra, he had the same idea that I had. We need to revive the Harinam Sankirtan process. And Indra went through the whole laundry list of cheating techniques. He would actually give lectures about how the GBC was selling candles and selling oil paintings and doing all kinds of crazy things instead of Sankirtan. And worse, they were calling all these cheating businesses Sankirtan. So again, same thing happened to him that happened to me. He was repressed, he was harassed, and they went further with him than they did with me. I think he was assassinated for making the same protests that I had made in 1976. The same exact protests that I had made is exactly the same points I was making are the same points he made later on, and he was repressed for that and possibly killed for that. So, in other words, eventually more and more people began to realize, what, that's right, the Harinam movement is gone, and instead it's being replaced with this whole cheating thing. Well, Tamal wanted all these cheating things. I mean, he was one of the masterminds of these oil painting business, candle business, so many other, all kinds of things to replace Sankirtan. But this is known even to the public, the Karmi public. The newspapers are always saying, what happened to the Hare Krishnas? We don't see them out on the street anymore. They're gone. So Tamal basically eliminated the Harinam Sankirtan movement, which is, he had this tendency to want to do that. But Tamal was, I have to admit, very expert, clever guy. And so what he always said was, even when Prabhupada was here, that people like me who were complaining about things, we were making politics. That was his famous slogan. Oh, they're exaggerating, they're lying, they're making politics, so don't listen to these people. So I compare his idea something to like a vampire bite. Once you get bitten by Tamal's idea, you start repeating his idea, you become a vampire. You become another Tamal in many respects. So I still have people who are criticizing me even today. And they're saying exactly what Tamal said in 1976. Oh, Pranjan, he's making politics, he's engaged in lying and distortion and cheating, and they're just quoting Tamal. In other words, they were bitten by Tamal's influence, and they still are. So a lot of the adults in ISKCON, as soon as Prabhupada left, and I started protesting these gurus, they all said what Tamal said. They began to repeat Tamal's slogans. Oh, well, Pranjan, that's politics. Well, yes, Jayachyuta's having sex and he's taking drugs, but he's still the guru. You don't want to challenge that, because that's politics, Prabhu. We have to worship illicit sex. We have to worship drugs, because otherwise, that's politics. So, that's what many of my godbrothers said. And later I said, well, there's a molesting problem. Yeah, but Prabhu, that's politics. We don't want to talk about politics. Yeah, well, now there's a real bad publicity problem. Yeah, but Prabhu, that's politics. So they were bitten by Tamal. And they became, they were no longer following Prabhupada. They were now following Tamal. And many still are. But the good news is many of my godbrothers are waking up and they're saying, wait a minute, no, that's right. Prabhupada was poisoned. That's right. The Harinam movement has been destroyed. That's right. Indra has now become like a popular figure, because people are saying, you know what, that is actually correct. The Harinam is gone. So people are waking up slowly, slowly. So the vampire bite effect is gradually reducing over time. And so all of this begs the question, why does God allow this? Why does God allow Jesus to be crucified? Why does God allow a betrayer like Judas to have an impact over Jesus? Why is the Judas of ISKCON, Tamal is sometimes called the Judas of ISKCON, why was he able to betray Prabhupada and have so much impact on Prabhupada and on his movement? Well, that is just the way, pure devotees have a Leela in this world. They come, and sometimes their followers betray them. This happened to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur in the 1930s. His leaders conspired to, become gurus after he left. Some people say he also was poisoned. He was being given injections. And it's actually common, unfortunately, in India that gurus are poisoned or given broken glass, or, in other words, gurus are being, murdered in some way or other, so that the followers, some motivated followers, can take over the mission and take over the property and the assets and become the worshipped successor. It is a problem. One thing that is very, very ironic is that Tamal was the person who coined the phrase that my idea, let's worship Prabhupada, is a Christian idea. He said, this is the Christian idea, that you worship a pure devotee after he's gone. Meanwhile, Tamal went to a Christian college when he was in Texas. So I'm the person who's promoting the Christian idea, supposedly. Meanwhile, he's going to the Christians to learn from them. So a lot of people, in other words, they're repeating slogans. They've got the vampire bite from Tamal, and they just go around repeating without thinking, what does this slogan actually mean? Tamal is saying, my idea is the Christian idea. Meanwhile, he's going to a Christian church, and no one sees the irony of that, because they just, they're repeating the slogans, and that's all they know. They don't think through, what does this mean, and why did Tamal go to the Christians? And what's wrong with the Christians? Anyway, what's wrong with the idea of worshiping a pure devotee? Now, another thing is that Tamal headed up the drive to send everybody to the Gaudiya Math. This was another vampire bite from Tamal. Everybody needs to go to the Gaudiya Math. Well, what happened then? Then in ISKCON, we developed Gaudiya Math ideas, like the idea that pure devotees fall down and become debauchees. Pure devotees need to be voted in and voted out every year at the Mayapur GBC meeting. All of these were Gaudiya Math ideas. So Tamal acted as Pied Piper, driving people away from ISKCON. He said, let's all go to the Gaudiya Math. Let's all go to Narayan Maharaj. Let's all go here and there. And so a lot of people were bitten by that vampire bite, and they still are. They're gone. They went over to Narayan Maharaj, they're still there. They went to Sridhar Maharaj, they're still there. They didn't realize Tamal was the person who led them down the garden path to Sridhar. And Tamal is the person who led them down the path to Narayan Maharaj. They just, they ended up at Narayan Maharaj's doorstep without realizing the vampire bite they got to bring them there was from Tamal. That's how they got there. And then Narayan Maharaj was making all kinds of critical statements about Prabhupada, offensive statements about Prabhupada. So how did people get there? Because Tamal led them there. So people don't realize the effect that Tamal has had. Now, Prabhupada did say the most sinister movement is within my movement. So he gave an indication that he did realize there were some very motivated leaders who could cause a lot of trouble for him and for his movement. But he never said that there was an Illuminati in his movement, or that even that there was an Illuminati, and that's why these people who have this theory aren't going anywhere with it, because Prabhupada never discussed that. But what he did discuss was how to fix everything, and the way to fix everything was just to go back to his original idea. His idea is you should just worship him, read his books, and accept his teachings, and that's what we're promoting, and that's why we are having success. We have all kinds of so-called Ritvik temples. Ritvik means they're worshiping Prabhupada. We have these Ritvik programs going on all over the world, and we're having success with that because we're not saying there's some big worldwide conspiracy that's going to stop you from worshiping Prabhupada. You can worship Prabhupada if you want to. So we're giving people hope and encouragement. You don't have to worry about the Illuminati. You just have to worship Prabhupada and go forward. And so we have a nice temple here in Sunnyvale, California, where they're worshiping Prabhupada, and the program's going forward nicely. We're not worried about the Illuminati over here. We're not worried about Tamal. We're not worried about the vampire program of Tamal because we're just moving ahead. So in 100 years from now, the Living Guru, GBC Guru program will not be known. It's just fizzling out, fading out, and it's just crumbling in one scandal after another. And even Badri Narayan says it just has no credibility anymore because every time you turn around, one of their gurus is falling down. The Gaudiya Math program is also not going that well, since the leaders of that program, Srila Maharaj, Narayan Maharaj, B.V. Puri, B.P. Puri, they're all gone now. So they all said you need a living guru, and now they're all dead. So there's no living guru for that program. So it's crumbling. So in time, our idea, the Prabhupada Nuga idea, we started using the term Prabhupada Nuga in the early 1980s, and now everybody's using that term, the Prabhupada Anuga. So that will last. In 100 years from now, there will be Prabhupada Anugas. There will not be a GBC Guru program. There will not be a Gaudiya Math Guru program. There will not be an Illuminati program. All these programs will fizzle and fade in time. And the Prabhupada Anuga program will be all that's left. And all of the people who said that the bogus appointment issue, the child molestation issue, the poison issue, the book changes issue, and all these other issues were politics and lies and misrepresentation, they're all fizzling out as well. More and more people are saying, no, these are all valid issues. They're not politics, they're not lies, they're not distortion, they're not, made up stories. They are real stories, what really happened to ISKCON. In fact, I now have godbrothers saying that I've underestimated the depth of depravity that the movement fell into. I now have people saying, no, it was much worse than you reported. So it wasn't just lies, it wasn't just politics, it was way worse than what I was reporting, according to a number of people right now. So that means our idea is gaining momentum. Now, after I had launched the poison issue, Tamal wrote a letter saying we have to stop Ranjan in the poison issue. So he knew that I was coming after him on this issue. And he knew that no one else really was, that I was the one pushing down on this issue. So he did know we were coming after him. Tamal had avoided going to India because he had a premonition that something bad would happen to him if he went there. But after we brought up the child molestation issue, he was convinced by the other leaders to go there, and he went. And when he left their meeting, he was killed in a car crash on the way, leaving the meeting. So I was blamed, of course, for, dragging Tamal to India to discuss that issue. So some people thought I had something to do with Tamal's death. And rather oddly, after Tamal has been known to be the cause of so many problems in ISKCON, there's still a few people, not many, but a couple of crybabies who are still thinking, oh, it's terrible, our hero Tamal is gone. So whenever Krishna appears, some very horrible demons also appear simultaneously, and apparently whenever Krishna's pure devotees appear, there are some very bad actors who appear at the same time, and that's just the way the world works. But in 1986, Sulochan said that most of the devotees in the Krishna movement had become Tamal's zombies. So they were like vampire zombies, whatever you want to call them. They had lost their will to think independently, or their ability to think independently. And so Sulochan said the only way we're going to fix this is to go outside. We're going to have to go to public media, public police, public court, public this, public everything. And he was right, because this applied external pressure to the ISKCON movement, and eventually our ideas began to penetrate into the institution. Jai, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hari Bol.